on the Vignette method in interpretive and qualitative research. My name is Østergaard Møller, and I am the instructor of the course in MethodsNET. So for the next hour, I have been given the opportunity to tell you a little bit about the content of the course and also give you an introduction to what is Vignette method and what is the Vignette methodology. And I know that if you have any questions, you can, there is a Q&A function at the bottom of the page, and use that and ask any questions you have, and then I will prioritize to address them in the end of my talk. So very, very welcome to this webinar. So I have a plan for today. I want to say briefly a little bit about what is Vignette, and then I want to say something about what is the Vignette method then, and also say something about why even bother to use this method, why use it, and in what kind of research situations you can say. So, but before I start, maybe I should also say that I am from Denmark and I am an associate professor at Aalborg University, and I have been part of the MethodsNET for, ever since it started, and I really hope to see some of you in this course or in Vienna this summer. Okay, so let's start with the content here. So what is a Vignette? So very basically, you can say that a Vignette is a short scenario, very often written in some kind of pictorial form, intended to provoke or elicit responses to typical scenarios. So think about a Vignette as a story, as a narrative, with very explicit intention to provoke particular scenarios. So a Vignette is a concrete example of people and their behaviors on which participants, your interviewees, can offer comments or opinions. So this second part of what is a Vignette is really important. So it's a very concrete example. It's something that is constructed in order for your participants, that is your interviewees or your survey respondents, if you work in surveys, to relate to very concrete examples of a representation of a scenario. So a Vignette is a story, typically about individuals, situations, and structures which can make reference to important points in the study of perceptions, beliefs, and attitudes. So basically, a Vignette is a story which we create when we want to study something that is very often very difficult to see or to talk about. So you can say that in terms of understanding a Vignette as a very short scenario, this is a definition which is very often used by quantitative researchers, because here the Vignette is seen as a tool to isolate impact of variables, basically. Whereas when you define and see a Vignette as a concrete example of people and their behaviors, this is a very typical definition used by qualitative researchers. And what we will emphasize in this course, that is as a tool to go into reasoning behind why people believe, think, or perceive of particular situations. So in terms of seeing a Vignette as a storyline or a story, this is a typical definition used in group research on sensitive topics. So you can see it here as a tool to collect situated meaning. And one very important thing here in terms of defining a vignette is that what we are trying to do actually is to get a little bit closer to real life situations. So we are kind of trying to simulate a real life situation, and using the vignette, we are trying to highlight, you can say, the difference between behavior and intention beliefs. So this comes with a lot of how can you say, this is something that is very important and challenging in the design and construction of vignettes, and something which we will pay a lot of attention to during the course. So what is it, just to go a little bit deeper into what is a vignette. A vignette is also a tool or concrete technique used in structured and in-depth interviews, as well as in focus groups, because it provides sketches of fictional, or you can say fictionalized scenarios. So what is a vignette? It's a tool, or it's a technique which you can implement or integrate in other research designs. And in this course, what we will focus on is in qualitative research designs, where you, for example, have semi-structured interviewing, or you'll do observations, or other kind of, what you can say, normal qualitative, where we use other qualitative techniques, and then you can use the vignette as an integrated part into this design. So when we use a vignette, what do we then do in practice? We invite our respondent to imagine a situation. And what we really want to do is to make the situation draw on his or her own experience. So you can say that the quality of the vignette really comes down to how well we have constructed it, how well described the situation or the behavior is, which we write down on a paper or in some format and present to the respondent, or to the interviewee. So vignettes can thus collect situated data on group values, on group beliefs and group norms of behavior. So they can really be used as a way to see how shared meaning is being negotiated in a group, in a focus group, but it can also be used just to simply represent shared meaning in a storyline, and then you can use it in individual interviews as well. In structured interviews or surveys, it's a little bit different, and we will not go into this variant of vignette method in this course, but basically the idea is the same. You construct a plausible story, and in surveys, what you do is that you make the respondent choose from a multiple choice menu of possible answers to a vignette. But even in qualitative research, very often we use semi-structured, or at least some kind of structured element in the interviews. And here, what we want to do is also to not force, but at least try to have the respondent answer and respond to the vignette in very concrete ways, so that we can use it later to compare responses across interviews. But this is only one way to use it, and I will say a little bit more about it later, about the difference between how we use the vignettes, and not least how we analyze the responses. So a vignette is also a tool, as I said before, which you can use in in-depth interviews and in focus groups. And here the vignettes, they act as a stimulus to to the extended discussion of the scenario in question. So imagine a group, a focus group, discussing the ethical issues in social work, for example. Then you can have a long discussion about that in the room, in the focus group. And then at some point you can introduce this storyline or this scenario into the group, and you can kind of steer an extended discussion around this very concrete example. So a vignette, basically, just to sum up on what I said, is a plausible short scenario of a particular behavior, a particular person, a particular situation, which you carefully describe in ways so that your respondent is encouraged to think about using his or her own experience to think about what meaning he or she associate with the content of the vignette. But a very important question, of course, also here is, what is a vignette method? And it's okay, besides being a very cool method, which can give you so incredible rich data, it's just to start from the beginning, you can say that it's a method used in both quantitative and in qualitative research. So in this course, we focus on when it is embedded into a qualitative research design. But as I said earlier, the idea of how to construct a vignette is very similar, both in quant and qual research. You can also say that a vignette method is a method to stimulate reactions, because we use very particular, well-chosen, intended words to describe a particular situation. Of course, what we do when we use vignettes in our research, what we do is that we prime reactions, we stimulate particular reactions. And that's also the point of it, you can say. So it's a method to collect, hopefully, precise qualitative information on reasoning, attitudes, judgments, and perceptions. And it's not to say that, I don't know if you can be interested in other issues besides reasoning, attitudes, judgment, and perception. I think you can, but my point here is to say that it's particularly good in terms of collecting good insight, information, data, knowledge about these difficult, you can say, cognitive phenomena. It's also, beyond this, you can also see the vignette method used as a longitudinal research instrument. Basically, what you can do is that you can see how persons, groups, a situation evolve over time by having a particular group or person respond to the same vignette over a longer period of time. And yeah, you can say that, just to sum up, you can say that the vignette method is a method to predict how people react in real life situations. And of course, this is something we are going to discuss very much in the course, to what degree we can say that interviewees' responses to vignettes can carry some predictive power in respect of how the respondents or the interviewees would behave if they were to be, if we could observe a real life situation. This is an important discussion, and you can say the quality criteria of the vignette, of the creation or the construction of the vignette, is really to what degree the situation you describe mirror real life events. It's also very good in terms of reveal taken for granted assumption trying to present or introduce particular framing of a case into a conversation as a way to you can say encourage the respondent to explain why he or she thinks or reason about whatever you present in the storyline. So one thing is to think about Vignette as a method, as a concrete tool that you integrate into your research design. Another thing is to think about what Vignette methodology, what kind of methodology does the use of vignettes imply? And as I said earlier, vignettes are used both in quant and qual, but just to start with the qualitative methodology, what we see very often is that here vignettes are used to study causal mechanisms in very specific context. And what characterizes the qualitative methodology is the, how can you say, the opportunity or the option to really construct, not complex, but at least vertical constructed stories, meaning that you can add a lot of nuances into your vignette, which are important in order to represent a plausible situation. So in a qualitative methodology, you will have what the literature calls, vertical constructed vignettes. Very often, you will have only one or few versions of a baseline vignette. So, for example, you can have one vignette describing a social class situation, a middle class situation, and then maybe you only have this situation, or you create another one where the social class is either or at least different from the first one. So this is also something which we will talk a lot about, how to design the vignette study in terms of how many vignettes do you need in order to create the knowledge and the data you would like to achieve. In qualitative methodology, what we often do is that we think about the vignettes together with the interviews. So very often they are embedded in interviews, and at some point during the interview, you will, as an interviewer, present the vignette saying, okay, I have this, very often I call it paper person, or I have this story, would you please read it? And then I have some questions for you afterwards. What we will do, and really very interesting talk actually about when to then integrate the vignette into your interview study, because it is such a very strong prime, which really carry a lot of stimulations in particular directions, which is also what we want. It's very important to have this reflection and discussion about how early in your interview do you want to prime your respondent in a particular direction. Also, because very often when we embed vignettes in a qualitative interview study, we start with very open interpretive questions, allowing the respondent or the interviewee to give us his or her causal understandings of the world, or his or her own narratives and associations. And then with the vignette, we suddenly really prime the situation and say, okay, here's an example of a particular situation. What do you think about that? Okay, so very often embedded in interviews, and of course, because when we work in a qualitative manner, we spend a lot of time on each respondent. So very often we have very few of them in our study, at least compared to a survey study. And you can say that very important also is that besides being used to study causal mechanisms in specific context, it's also used as a way to make context and structure of association matter to output as attitudes, perceptions, judgments, evaluations, and assessments. So basically, when we know that structure of associations matter to, for example, the role played by social class in a particular context, this is a super good methodology to use in order to actually access these very difficult layers of reality. So in a quantitative methodology, not that we are going to expand on this in the course, but just to give you an idea about the difference between the qualitative use of vignettes and the quant. You can say that in quantitative methodology, vignettes are used to study not causal mechanisms as in-depth understanding of how reasoning relates to perceptions and attitudes and choices of actions, but more used to study causal relations and causal effects of combinations of input in some context. So where in the qual you will see vignettes sometimes quite complex constructed in terms of the storyline, what we call the vertical constructed vignettes. Here in quant, it's more normal, or how can you say, it's more about constructing very small storylines, which can then vary on particular issues. So what the literature will call a horizontal constructed vignette. So imagine basically more or less the same storyline, but then it varies on very particular words and sets of associations in the vignette. So here you have many versions of the baseline vignette to actually be, so that you can be able to control and see what happens if we change this word and not change this word in the storyline and keeps other representations there. So here, where we used in qual, we embed in interviews here, what you do is that you embed the vignettes in surveys. And of course, we have many respondents, which means that you can really use the different reactions to the vignettes to see what matters in the storyline in terms of the output or the dependent variable you are studying. Again, so totally the same as in the qualitative methodology. You use it in quant when you know that context and structure of associations matter to output, and that context and structure of associations appear as attitudes, perception, judgments, as evaluations of situations and assessments. So you can say in a way the same overall understanding of social reality in a way. So the third way to understand the Vignette methodology is as an intervention methodology. And this is a very powerful tool when you use the Vignette as an intervention methodology. It's here what you do is that you very often want to create interactive vignettes, meaning that you create vignettes which have continuing face stories. Very often this is not done as paper people, as people stories written on paper, but rather it can be a video, or it can come in many formats. And the point is that the vignette then has a part one, then you introduce it, you talk about it, and then it is your interviewee who then decides the next phase of the story, or has to choose between different storylines. Here, what very often in the intervention methodology, you'll see the vignettes embedded in group interviews, in focus groups, but also if you want to use it in action research, in consultancy, or as a professional who wants to study education, or do education, or use it as a treatment. Again, in the intervention methodology, the idea is that you know how context and structure of associations matter to output. And output understood as attitudes, perception, judgments, evaluations, and assessments. And of course, one thing we're going to address very much in the course is that why is that so important? And sometimes maybe it's not important, but in many cases in social science, we are really interested in understanding how people's attitudes are composed, used, changed, how deliberate they are, and how easy it is to change or impact how people think about particular issues. Then the last version, you can say, of, or the last version I will mention here, at least, of a Vignette methodology, is as a result, as a methodology where the Vignette becomes a result in itself. So you can say it's almost like a grounded theory results, where you maybe have done a lot of observations, a lot of field work, collected different sources of data. You have had formal and informal conversations. You have used either structured or semi-structured interviews, and you have really an intense amount of data. Of course, you sort it, you read it, you analyze it, you code it, whatever you do to reach a kind of summary and final understanding of it. Then what you can do here, and this is where the Vignette method comes in, is that you can represent all your knowledge into a Vignette. So end your research by developing a Vignette, a storyline of whatever it is that you're studying. So here what we can say is that in this case, we will see vignettes as the end product of inductive analysis of a specific social context, which maybe you will, or maybe you won't, but you can at least see it as something you want to use as a tool in a new research. And again, like in the earlier versions of the Vignette methodology, the view here is that context and structure of associations matter to output in the form of attitudes, perceptions, and so on. So again, the same idea about using vignettes to dig into people's belief system, you can say. So the last point I will say something about here is when to do it. And I have in this webinar skipped the whole thing about how to construct a vignette, because there's no doubt about that this is a very time-consuming method in terms of the energy, which means also, the time and the carefulness you need to put into designing and constructing vignettes. This is something we will spend a lot of time on in the course. How to then write the vignette, how to find out what content that should be in it. So and now I'm saying this to motivate this final point that has to do with when to use Vignette method. And of course, thematically speaking, you can say that it's a very fruitful method to use if you're interested in attitudes, beliefs, and judgments of people. And it's also a very strong, or you can say, it's a very strong method to use because it allows actions in context to be explored. Because with the Vignette, you can fixate particular situations, which you will have been spending a lot of time identifying and describing using very particular words and associations. When to use Vignette method. Also, if you want to understand, but also when you want to clarify people's judgment. So in a qualitative study where you allow people to bring forward their own understanding of the phenomena you are studying, this is very important in order to go deep in terms of exactly understanding and explaining people's belief systems on their own terms. But if you also want to compare and analyze how people think about, for example, or how they, to clarify the people, no, if you want to clarify more deeply how people's constructions of particular situations, how they appear and how they are structured, then this is a really, really good method. So too many words, but basically, if you want to clarify people's judgments, it is a very strong method. This is a very important point. It's a very good method to use if you want to provide a less personal and therefore a less threatening way of exploring sensitive topics. And what do I mean by this? So on the one hand, you can say that a vignette needs to be extremely precise. It has to represent a real life situation, a real life behavior, or whatever it is that you want to use in your storyline. But on the other hand, it is exactly a construction. And this means that it is fictitious. It is something you have made up. And if you study a very sensitive area, it could be immigration, it could be social work, it could be a lot of whatever area where also maybe if you interview professionals, if they have some ethical commitments which will prevent them from talking so free about the work which you would like them to do, then if you give them a plausible storyline of a situation, which is a fiction, this will exactly allow them to talk much more freely about their work and not least their belief systems. It's also really powerful if you are doing if you have a longitudinal perspective in your qualitative research. It could either be because you want to see how people change over time, or how their assessments and understanding of a particular phenomena changes over time. Then you can present the same vignette over time to them and see if they reason in different ways. Maybe if you are part of a bigger intervention project where you want to see if they have changed their attitude towards their job or whatever it is. But this is one version of it. But also if you are interviewing overdevelopments, very particular input situations over time, then you can use the vignette to help you clarify these developments. Also, just to sum up, if you want to be specific, if you want to be time order or specific, and this is meant in a very interpretive, qualitative way, meaning so if you want to understand very precisely how particular values or situations matter in, for example, a belief system or in a judgmental system. Also, if you want to measure effects of variance on specific factors, And this is actually also something we will address in this course, because even though we work in a qualitative research design, there's no hinder of us not integrating a variance-based Vignette scenario into our study. But this is also something which we will address specifically. Also, if we want to compare, simply compare in order to understand meaning of difference. So in a way, you can say that if you have a qualitative study where you allow your interviewees to bring forward their own understandings, then adding an element of a constant or some element of control into this interpretive research design is super powerful, and where you can exactly use the Vignette method as your method to do this. So one thing is when to use Vignette method. Another question is why do it? As I said earlier, it is not just something you do from one, it's not something you just do overnight. Developing a Vignette takes a lot of work. It has to be validated, both in terms of whether the narrative works on its own, but also in terms of whether you are indeed representing practice or social reality as you intend. So the whole pilot testing and developing side of this is it's intense, creative, and super interesting. But of course, something you should think about. So why use it? Why use Vignette method? I would say definitely if you want to strengthen your research design, especially your construct validity and also causal claims. Why use Vignette method? Definitely if you want to study attitudes, beliefs, and judgments in depth, if you want to stimulate extended, prolonged, deep conversations about difficult subjects. And why use Vignette method? Definitely also if you want to study very specific questions in context. The role of professional experience in a collaborative context, for example, or it could be in many different kind of particular contexts. Why use Vignette method? Also, if you want to create what I call, or what you can call good data or vivid data, and not least, when you want to, or if you want to protect your interviewees or your participants from ethical dilemmas, really having these super plausible, good storylines, having them introduced into the conversation really creates this much more free space and free way of talking about difficult things compared to when you ask people directly into their experience. Very often we will do both, but the combination also is very powerful. So I guess these were some of, I would say, the main arguments or reasons for why you could use Vignette method in your qualitative research. And now the final slide I have for you today is simply an overline over the day-to-day plan of the Vignette course. So we have 5 days together and we'll meet 3 hours every day. And on the first day, the topic will be actually an extended discussion of the webinar today, introducing Vignette methods and what it means, and the different versions of vignettes and the different, you can say, methodologies will be introduced on the first day. And then on the second day, we will talk about the positions in Vignette methods. And the third day, it will be all about designing vignettes. So really a handcraft day where we practice, talk about, discuss, and read about how to design, what to put into them, and not least also how to integrate the constructed vignettes into our overall research design. On the fourth day, we will focus on then how to analyze the responses to the vignettes. Very important. One thing is to construct and have them and have the perfect design and intentions, but then how to then use them in the conversation is another thing, and how to analyze the responses, the reactions your interviewers have from or after having read the vignettes. So day 4 will be all about saying, remember that one thing is to create the vignettes, but you won't get the data until you have asked your respondents about what do you think. So creating good questions to the vignettes and analyzing the responses will be the topic of day 4. And then on the final day, we will focus on how to interpret and draw conclusions from vignette studies. Going back to a discussion which we will have many times during the course about the difference between reality, behavior, or you can say the difference between real behavior and reactions to a constructed vignettes. It will be also an important theme on day 5. Every day what we'll do is that we'll talk theory for the first hour will be about theory, and then we'll have a small break and elaborate or discuss the theory as the second part of this first part of the day. So it's very important that we have all read the material so that we can have these theory discussions. And then every day what I'll do is that I will unfold a case example, different studies where vignettes have been used with different purposes and within different vignette methodologies. So every day we will unfold a case, and every day we will bring your questions, needs, your own work into play as the final part of the day. Yes, and this was all I had for you today, and now I'm ready. If there are any questions, then please just ask them, and I'll do my best to answer them.
Hi Marie, if you can go into the Q&A, there's a couple of questions in there for you to answer.
Okay, but yeah, then I need to. Can I just?
Yeah, you can take the slide down if you want to. Or I can read them out, whatever's easiest for you.
Wait, I think I'm here. Wait, I'll start my video. Stop sharing. Yes, 2 questions, right?
Yeah.
So there's one question from Rita. Could you provide some helpful bibliography on the method, seminal authors or studies where it has been applied, that is literature on its epistemological and methodological principles, and how to use the method in qualitative research projects? Thank you for this question, Rita, and all this will be in the course. So yeah. So I don't have any long bibliography here, but that will of course be part of the course. If it's new, Rita asks, is this methodology new? When was it first applied? Good question. Who created it? I think Barton Reynolds' date goes back to the early 90s. Yeah, so it goes back to the early 90s, and I know a lot of studies from that period and until today. So I think I don't know if that's new. No, not super new. Ari says, can you give some more examples of using vignettes in sensitive situations, perhaps both in quant and in qual design? Yes. So, for example, if you are studying professional discretions among, it could be psychologists or it could be childcare workers who have, who are, how can you say, who cannot talk about their real cases. That's very sensitive topics, because what you want to know is exactly how they make judgments, and how maybe you want to study whether they are stereotyped in their approach to the situations or not. And this can be extremely sensitive. So it can be when you are studying, for example, professionals who have a particular responsibilities towards the clients. But it can also be in terms of other situations, could be in power unequal situations where you want to encourage, for example, employees to say something about their organization.